Hi gang, Alice here from the Digital Inkwell. In this conversation, I'm speaking with David Rose. He's been involved with computing and tech since the 90s at least. He's one of the founding members of the Singularity University. Really interesting person and a proper nice guy. This was the first interview, the first conversation I ever had for the Digital Inkwell. I have nothing to offer to David Rose at all. No platform, no reach, no clout, nothing. And amazingly, he said yes to speaking to me. He was really generous, really humble. It was such a great conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. We talk about innovation arcs. We talk about what the state of AI and society is likely to be in the next 5, 10, and 20 years. It's a really interesting conversation. I'm not going to edit or do anything with the video, so sorry / you're welcome. Enjoy.
Okay, I am joined today by David Rose, serial entrepreneur, angel investor, and I believe Business Insider or Business Week, accused you of being a world-conquering entrepreneur. How do you feel about that label?
Well, I think there's a lot of world to conquer, but I've been an entrepreneur. I'm actually a fifth-generation serial entrepreneur. So I've been starting companies since I was about 10 years old, and as an active angel investor, have been supporting early-stage startups for quite a while. I've helped to fund over 120 companies. I founded New York Angels, which is one of the world's largest, most active angel investment groups. Started a whole bunch of companies on my own. I'm running several companies on an ongoing basis. So I don't know about world conquering, but I'm certainly an entrepreneur, and I'm certainly involved globally.
Fantastic. Am I right in recalling that one of your early ventures, was it something called like Computer Week or something like that? It was a lot to do with education in the tech environment.
The computer classroom.
Yeah.
It was one of the very, very first computer business education companies, started in 1983. So
Wow.
That sort of, puts a stake in the ground way, way back then. I actually started that with my Columbia Business School math professor, who was the head of training for Citibank back then. And we started the computer classroom, and we did corporate training on how to use computers with these newfangled things like spreadsheets. And so that was before Excel even existed. We started training people on VisiCalc and then Lotus. So these are all names that have been lost in history, but they were the first spreadsheets and word processors and the like.
This is one of the reasons why I was so excited to talk to you, because I think what that demonstrates is how future-facing you seem to have been throughout your career, and is one of the reasons I was really interested to hear your thoughts and opinions on the development of Web3 and AI. I wonder if you'd like to talk a little bit about what you're currently working on and how your thoughts about Web3 and AI sort of interact with or intersect any projects that you're currently interested in.
But let's back up a little bit. About 14, 15 years ago or so, I helped to found something called Singularity University. And Singularity University, which you or your listeners may or may not have heard of, is sort of a think tank now known as Singularity Group in Silicon Valley. And it was based on the work of a guy named Ray Kurzweil, Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil is one of the closest things we have to Thomas Edison in this generation. He's won the Presidential Medal of Science and the Lemelson Prize at MIT, and he's currently director of research at Google. And he was the guy who, as a teenager, he invented a computer to compose music. He invented the optical scanner for reading Braille. He invented the Kurzweil keyboard for music groups and so on and so forth. And so he's, in addition to being an entrepreneur and an inventor and a technologist, he's a researcher about science. And he noted that technology was advancing very, very rapidly. We all know technology is advancing, but it seemed to be getting more and more rapid. And Gordon Moore, who had been the CEO of Intel, had noted many years ago what has become known as Moore's Law, which is that the number of transistor equivalents that Intel could fit onto a single integrated circuit seemed to be doubling every 18 months. And so he looked at that and looked into the Intel labs and said, well, as far as we can tell, this is going to go on and on. It's been going on this way since we started putting chips on transistors on a chip, and it looks like this doubling is going to keep going. And that became known as Moore's Law, which technically describes the fact that the number of chips transistors Intel can fit in a chip was doubling every 18 months. And because chips are what we use for computer power, that became known as sort of an accelerating technology guideline. And Kurzweil looked at this and said, okay, well, that's about computer chips, but technology, certainly before there were computers in the late 20th century, technology was advancing and advancing more rapidly than in the 19th century. So he wondered how far back this doubling of technology went. So to do that, he had to come up with a new definition, not just transistor equivalents on a chip. So he sort of generalized it to millions of instructions per second per dollar, which sort of combines, the output of something with speed and power and cost. And so once you sort of generalize that, then you can look at any kind of technology and put it on the same kind of scale. And so he did that, and then he looked back throughout the 20th century, going back from 1908 when Herman Hollerith invented punch cards and founded what eventually became IBM to create the 1910 census. And then you're looking at things like relays that allow you to throw a large load with a small current, and then vacuum tubes, which allowed you to actually, sort of keep one bit in a vacuum tube, and then transistors, and then integrated circuits with multiple transistors. Each of these are a paradigm shift that changed the way we advance with technology. And once he calculated and standardized everything to the same measure, Kurzweil realized that, son of a gun, technology had actually been advancing at the pace of Moore's law at this doubling every 18 months since the beginning of the 20th century.
Okay.
So then he said, okay, wait a minute. If it went back to the beginning of the 20th century through different kinds of technology, relays and circuits and so on and so forth, maybe it can go back even farther in time than that. And so he did a big research effort and pulled together everybody's lists of all of the major paradigm shifts in history, and from inventing, the wheel to fire to the Bronze Age to, Roman aqueducts and all those kinds of things. He got all the lists from the British Museum and the Smithsonian and Ariel Durant and all these things, and put everything on a big list and said, okay, let's see when these major paradigm shifts happened and what the frequency of them was. And it turns out he stepped back in astonishment that technology has been advancing at this same rate, has been increasing at this same rate since the beginning of recorded human history. And he thought, well, wait a minute. How is it possible if technology has been advancing this fast, since Neanderthals? How come Neanderthals didn't have iPhones back then? And of course, the answer to that is we as humans tend to think of things in linear terms. In the old days, if you were an ancient Roman or you were a Stone Age person, the technology that existed when you were born was the same technology that existed when you died. It was a flat line between those two. Over time, then as you began to have inventions, the Archimedean screw and whatever it is, an invention could do like a little step function, and it could improve a little bit during your lifetime. By the time you got to like the 19th century and late 19th century, when you began to have science fiction writers and so on, and you were developing as the Industrial Revolution, machinery, technology clearly began to accelerate. And so now you look at that flat line, and it began to tilt, and you can project forward on this flat line. And that's the way as humans we think of in terms of continuing things. We project out if it's happening today, it'll happen tomorrow. And so therefore, if you take a scale, it's called a linear scale, a straight line, and you go forward one step and you go up one step, you go forward 2 steps and up 2 steps, forward 3, up 3, and effectively, if you've gone forward 18 steps, you're 18 steps higher. But what Kurzweil noted was that Moore's law was not adding 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. It was doubling. It was doubling every 18 months. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 36, 61, 22, 65, 12, 10, 24, and so on and so forth. And so it turns out that if you do this, if you go 1 step forward linearly, you're up 1. If you go 1 step forward exponentially, you're up 1. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and all of a sudden you're in what's called a power curve. And therefore, if you start back at the beginning very, very small, like 0.0001, and you double it, you get 0.0002, and the increment is very, very small, and you really can't see it. The next increment is 0.004, you still can't see it. 0.008, you still can't see it. It goes like this in a straight line until all of a sudden you hit the knee of the curve, as they call it, and it goes 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 30, 1 gig, 2 gig, 4 gig, 1 terabyte, and all of a sudden it goes wham, almost vertically. And so he wrote a book called The Singularity is Near. What's the singularity? The singularity is a term that's been used to describe the next major paradigm shift, according to Kurzweil, is not the integrated circuit. It's not any technology we have now. The next major technology shift, paradigm shift, is when computers and humans merge. So either we'll be able to take your entire brain and put it in a box, or we'll be able to take that box and feed your entire brain with everything you know and think, and so on and so forth. Think about the Matrix, right? And so when is this likely to happen? According to Kurzweil's projections, it's 2045.
Wow.
That is 22 years from today, in your lifetime, in my lifetime, and I'm older than you are. So you're sitting here in that point. You will have computers and humans merge, where the next generation of computers are programming the following generation of computers. You already have, as you've seen with ChatGPT, which came out just a few months ago, you can tell it, write me a computer program with X, Y, or Z, and it will do it. And the next thing is it'll do it on its own without you having to actually ask it. And so the question then is, when that happens, what will the future look like beyond that? And the answer is, nobody knows, because it's just so far beyond our comprehension that that's become known as the technological singularity. Like going back in time with the singularity with the beginning of the universe, we don't know what happened before that because it's beyond our event horizon. In this particular case, the singularity going forward, we have no friggin' clue what can happen when computers and humans merge and the computers are designing the next generation, and it's happening so fast that it's going to happen within our lifetime. And so this book came out. It's called Singularity is Near. And there were sort of three reactions to this book. One of them was people saying, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, human exceptionalism, people are people, computers and boxes can never be computed. Not going to happen, not going to happen. Okay, put those people aside because it is happening. The second group of people said, okay, the research is right. The projections are pretty much right, except what you're not taking into account here are human beings. And we're not that good, because we are going to, between now and the time we get to the singularity, we are going to warm the planet out of existence and live in a boiling cauldron or whatever it is. We are going to, have somebody's going to have a suitcase nuke and blow up all of the major cities of the world. We're going to have an EMP and destroy. Humanity is not going to live to the next see the singularity. So therefore, better solve our problems now, because we're not getting there. The third group of people, who are as smart as the second group of people, but a little more optimistic, say, okay, some way, somehow, we're going to figure out how to stay a quarter step ahead of this technological stuff that's going on, and so therefore we will live to see the technological singularity. So now what? And so it was on the basis of that this thing called Singularity University was formed to investigate and think about what the heck's going to happen there and what can we do now, knowing that that's coming. And so it was sponsored by Google and NASA and Cisco and Autodesk and Nokia and venture funds and a bunch of individual people, including me and some others. The faculty they brought together was this mind-boggling faculty. Vince Cerf, who invented the internet, Larry Page from Google, Ralph Merkle, who invented public key encryption and realized the blockchain, Daniel Kraft, John Barry, a three-time shuttle astronaut. I mean, an incredible group of people over here. Rabbi Salim Ismail, who's known for exponential organizations. And so the question was, okay, let's create a program to take the best and brightest future thinkers and let them know, the singularity is coming, and see if they can help solve problems that will positively affect the lives of 1 billion people. That was the goal. And so they did a test the first year with 40 people for a summer program, 10-week graduate program in the summer. And then after that, it moved to 80 people. And so for these 80 people, word began to get out, it grew exponentially. And so you had, hundreds of people applying, then thousands of people applying. And, by the time they ran it for 10 years, and the class, by the time they got to the end of it, you had of these 80 people, people applied from 100 different countries. The average age was 35. The average person had a doctorate or 2 masters, had started 2 companies or other organizations, and was, the most incredible group you've ever seen. And this kind of group was, first of all, we would teach them he announced this, and I said, "This is fascinating. What are all the topics you're going to cover?" And he said, "Well, space and biotechnology and nanotechnology, and this and that, and so on and so forth, and economics and finance, and business." I said, "Oh, who's running that program?" He said, "You are." I said, "Okay." So that's how I became the founding track chair for finance, economics, and entrepreneurship at Singularity University. And so I taught that whole track, and we were doing research in that. And so we would let people know about exponential growth. We would discuss the major challenges that affected society, discuss all of these 10 different areas where technological research was happening, and then for the last third of the summer, they would go off and have a team project to see if they could positively affect the lives of 1 billion people. And I am delighted to say that one of the very first groups, the first team project that very first year where we had 40 people, were looking at car sharing services, which were just starting. Uber and Lyft had just started. And they said, well, how about if we go beyond that, and instead of having to own the cars, how about if everybody's car can be part of this? And so how about if you could just say, throw your car into a pool, and so when anybody could check, instead of going to rent a car, they could rent your car. They'd see your car, they go over, they'd use their iPhone to unlock your car, and they could drive your car out and then bring it back and park it. We thought that was pretty cool. And so that team they named themselves Get Around. And I'm delighted to say that 2 weeks ago, Get Around went public on the New York Stock Exchange and is now a $1 billion plus corporation. So that directly came out of Singularity University. And so therefore, this is the whole big background to answer your question. I have been focused for much of my life, and certainly for the last 15 years or so, on this question of advancing technology and its impacts on business and life and everything else. So therefore, both as an investor, as an entrepreneur, I have been focused on looking at technology, seeing how technology is changing the underlying paradigms of what's going on, and then trying to build businesses and invest in businesses around that. So that's the rough, very back end to your answer.
That was a fantastic answer. Thank you for that. I would love you to talk a little bit about how your thinking has changed over those years that you've been working with the Singularity University and keeping in mind this tech futurist perspective in your business endeavors. Is there anything that you think now that you didn't think before, and vice versa?
Well, there are lots of things. The single most important thing about Singularity University for anybody who has been through it, and by the way, everybody who has been through it is, comes away amazed. It's a completely mindset change. And the biggest mindset change is I liken it to getting a permanently affixed pair of augmented reality goggles. So once you start thinking about exponentials and thinking about how technology is growing exponentially, you look at literally everything differently. The world simply looks different when you think about exponentials. Why? Because, first of all, we are moving to a bit world. We are moving to a computerized world. Technology is invading every aspect of everything. I mean, as we just saw from, ChatGPT in the last, couple of months, it's now invading poetry and writing blog posts and doing everything else. But even before that, I mean, if you've been to an Amazon Go, it's a retail. You walk into a store, pick things off the shelf and walk out. There's no retail clerk. You buy a book, you're reading it on your Kindle, you're doing it online. You're doing when you want a car, whether you either Get Around, you're renting somebody else's car, or you're in Uber, or you're getting in your Tesla self-driving vehicle, and we're going to have completely autonomous vehicles everywhere, right, in a matter of just a few years. And so, therefore, everything increasingly is moving to technology. Number two, if anything can be done by technology, it will be done, because technology is now so pervasive, the population is so growing, and technology is so powerful that you can't stop it. You can't legislate it out of existence. You can't custom it out of existence. If it can be done, it will be done. and anything can be done with technology. So if you think about the fact that anything can be done, anything can be done will be done. One of the touchstones for my course at Singularity U, which actually is to my delight has gone into the quotation books, is that any company designed for success in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st. Because the whole underpinnings of our society, everything you think, and my keynote lecture for the class at Singularity, which I still do these days, is everything you think you know is wrong. Because everything that we grew up with, even a millennial, like you, everything is changing. It's changing underneath you. And so, certainly for anybody born in the 20th century, when you live in I was talking to my kids, and the idea, somebody mentioned, changing, they moved their address, but they've kept their same phone number, and my kids are saying, kept their same phone number. Why would you not keep your same phone number? And then, the people who are older than they are around the table are thinking, well, oh, wait a minute. Right. When we were growing up, a phone was tied to a location. It was hardwired to your house. Of course, nobody has a landline phone anymore. Everybody has a mobile. So, of course, your phone goes with you. Right. So just things like that. The fact that your car can drive yourself, the fact that you pay everything with plastic, and not even plastic. You pay with it on your watch or your phone or your built-in whatever it is. So change is the only thing that is constant, right? When you start thinking about singularity, you start thinking about technological exponential development, you have to be open, and you cannot be locked in place. And that's why my thing about companies designed for the 20th century are doomed to failure, because if you are designed for a world that doesn't exist anymore, you have to fail as opposed to somebody else who's taking advantage of this. And so there are clearly, along the way to the singularity, there have been a number of seminal, really, really important developments. Clearly, the internet was one of those. The World Wide Web is another. Artificial intelligence is another. And to my mind, Web3 and blockchain is one of those as well. It is fundamental. And part of the challenge that we see with blockchain and Web3 stuff is that A, it's complicated, which means that not everybody understands it. B, as with many new technologies that have great applicability, there have been a rush of all kinds of people doing all kinds of things. And because it seemed so crazy in the first place that people didn't understand it, and there was so much scamming on the one hand, speculation on the other hand, and well-intentioned but wrong approaches to doing things, this has, in the popular zeitgeist, become this giant miasma of something really big that's volatile beyond belief, that goes worth $1 trillion, worth nothing. It's all scam. It's all imaginary, everything. And so nobody really gets it. Nobody really understands why it's useful. Even speculators who were speculating on the latest, cool token, which is go up in value and quintuple tomorrow morning and then go down by half the next day and stuff, don't really get what the power here is. But if you strip away all of the current tokenomic stuff, you strip away all of the gaming, you strip away all of the scam coins, you strip away all of the ridiculous stuff in there, and you think about what this means, it really is important. And it's important because it's seminal and it's foundational for everything that happened. And for those of you, I'm sure most of the listeners of the podcast are somewhat familiar with blockchain, but to quickly recap for those who may have been living under a rock somewhere and don't know what's going on, the challenge of our society today, the 20th century world in which we live, is that money is this medium of exchange, and you pay for things with money because you all believe that money has value and you can exchange it. But when you exchange money, either you give somebody a piece of currency or you're not. And if you don't, when you say, well, I pay with plastic, or I'm paying digitally, or it's on the web, well, no. What you're actually doing today is that little piece of currency is sitting in a bank somewhere. And all you are doing, whether it's on your credit card or online or whatever else, is sending an instruction to your bank to transfer a piece of physical currency to somebody else's account. And so Everything about this, the whole payment system, Stripe and Square and all that kind of stuff is all based on sending directions to this whole wonderfully big, fancy schmancy integrated system, which says, take some of my money and put it into your account. And it's because money was pieces of paper and wasn't designed to be sent electronically. We built all these big systems around doing it, and all these middlemen and people in the middle. And so to go from, you eat dinner at a restaurant, by the time it comes out of your paycheck at the other end, there have been like 15 people along the way, each of whom got their little piece as that little piece of currency or a notation moved from place to place. And the problem is when you are putting your money at a bank or borrowing from a credit card and telling somebody to move it from here to there, that's fine, but you're trusting them. Right? And so you have your money in a bank, and you are trusting the bank to pay it to somebody else when you tell them. And as we've seen, if you're doing something in computers on the internet where we're connected to everybody, well, now you got to go offline. You get that piece of paper moved from someplace to someplace else over here, and you got to trust the bank to do it. And so it's merging the new world and the old world. Bit of a problem. The whole development of the blockchain and the technology that underlies Web3 and all of these tokens and everything else was the idea of having some kind of system that would allow people to not trust somebody else, but to trust everybody or trust nobody. And the essence of blockchain or distributed ledger technology is that through some mysterious technology magic, which is actually very rational, of rational people doing rational things, there is this distributed ledger so that everybody can see what happened. And it's irrevocable. Once it's on there, you can never be erased or moved, and you can always go back and look at it. Right? So the core key thing of the blockchain is that there is this immutable, unchangeable public ledger that everybody can see and that no one person controls. It's controlled effectively by the crowd. And so you have to sort of take that on faith, if you're not a techie, that thing exists. But once you get that thing existing, everything else drops into place, because then it's a question of, once you now have an irrevocable ledger, you can say, okay, I am creating this David dollar, and this David dollar, I am now creating, 100 David dollars. There are only 100 right here, and you can go back and see that there are only 100 David dollars over here, right? And I have them. I created them, so I have them. Oh, and okay, I'm now giving you one David dollar. Well, let's record that on this chain too. So now I have 9 David dollars, and you have 1 David dollar. We created 10, and you have 1 David dollar. So now the fact that you have it, well, we can see, everybody can see it's on this chain. You didn't have to trust anybody. And so therefore, if you believe that David dollars have value, you now have one, and you can now give it to somebody else. And so therefore, the idea of having a definitive distributed ledger that everybody can trust and nobody controls means two major things. One, you can now create new currencies like fiat currencies, which are currencies created by a country, except David creates it. So the question is, do you trust in David, or do you think there's a reason for why David dollars are worth anything? That's a whole other question, but that's a separate question from the blockchain technology question, right? So there will ultimately be, without question, digital euros, digital dollars, digital pounds, no question. It's going to happen. The only question is it going to happen this week, next week, this year, 10 years from now, 25 years from now? But it will happen. And so when you have a digital U.S. dollar by the U.S. government saying, okay, forget the little piece of paper running around, it's all digital, and it will ultimately be all digital, you now have the ability to check and see where that dollar went, and you can trace it and everything else. All right, so now that you have a digital dollar, or something before a digital dollar, a coin, call it Ether, Bitcoin, or something else, you now have the ability, because that lives in cyberspace, that lives in the digital world, to include money into computer programs. And so unlike having to send a message through 15 intermediaries to move a dollar bill from my account to your account, you now have that piece of money living digitally online, can be moved programmatically online, and all of a sudden it cuts out 15 middle people, it cuts out all the delays, it cuts out all the expense, it cuts out an enormous chunk of society in the business world that currently exists, but it opens up inherently an enormous layer of possibilities of all kinds of things when you have value as part of a computer program. So now you can do things with a smart contract, and you can have outside oracles and outside things that say, okay, if the temperature does this, which we agree to take from the sensor over here, that then triggers something on a computer, which can trigger payments and can trigger contracts and can trigger other kinds of things. And so absolutely the world is heading to digital currency, totally. It will be based on blockchain, which has proven over more than a decade to be effectively unhackable and solid. And once you now combine that with exponential technology where everything from virtual reality to augmented reality to access to everything is going into technology and online and higher speed, doubling every 18 months, you end up in a world where the entire world, other than our physical bodies and the immediate physical creature comforts around us, lives online in an entire economy where everything is being created online, paid for online, exchanged online, developed online without borders, national borders, without any kinds of limitations by race, color, creed, national origin, disability, or anything else. You will be living in a totally connected, totally mobile world where everything lives in the cloud, and that is what is all facilitated ultimately by Web3 and by blockchain. And that's another half-hour answer that you didn't ask for, but you got it.
I literally asked for it, David, so thank you. Thank you for that. I would love it if you spoke some more specifically about smart contracts and blockchain in the context of the creative economy and what kind of creative opportunities these technologies specifically might make possible.
There are two different ways to look at the creative economy and blockchain, right? One of them is technology around the creative economy, and the other is the business around the creative economy. And they're two different things, right? So you look at something like Avatar: Way of Water. If you haven't seen the first Avatar or the current sequel, they are literally mind-blowing in what can be done using technology and integrating humans and computer-generated things completely seamlessly. We are getting there. I mean, we will soon be in a world in which anything one can envision can be created. Kinds of things we don't even think about right now, not just visual art or interactive or representation or time motion art or other kinds of things, things that you can only imagine. You'll have electrodes you can plug in here and you can imagine a whole world of whatever, right? And you can't even describe it. And so technology will open up a whole host of new types of experiences and art and ways of expression on the one hand. On the other hand, historically, art was a thing. If you bought a painting, until the mid-19th century, if you bought a painting, you owned the painting. There was none of this reproduction rights stuff. There was nothing ownership versus, physical, whatever it is there. But then as you began to move into reproduction, and now you have a photograph of painting and you printing. My hobby is actually printing. I'm a printer. You can create things. When you have a copyright started out because, okay, if I do a book and then somebody literally clones that book from the print shop next door and takes it out there, and I spent all this time and effort working on creating the property there, that doesn't seem right. Why would I do this if somebody can go steal it? So the concept of copyright came out and the ability to do that, and then copyright pirates came out, and there are all kinds of wonderful stories in the 19th century, 18th century, getting, as books got shipped from Europe to America, being the first person on the dock to grab the book and go and set another copy of the book and print it to get it out before the first guy came in with his book. But in any event, so ownership and so copyright, intellectual property, which intellectual property does not exist as a natural order of things. It's not like you can own a rock or you can own a tree. Owning the right to control publication or profit from a piece of intellectual property is a relatively advanced concept in terms of business, has proven critical to the creation of art and all other kinds of things, whether it's science and patents and the like. And so taking art and taking creative work and tying it to the blockchain simply gives you the ability, if nothing else, then to fractionalize the ownership of that piece in a way that multiple people can benefit from it. And so some of the early stuff that we're seeing effectively are royalty pools, where you have the rights to royalties for a work of music or a film or something else being packaged as an NFT and sold. And so anybody who owns a share of the royalty rights for this thing gets a piece. When those royalty rights are paid, historically by a check or whatever it is, quarterly, you get it. But increasingly tying in the metaverse, once this art is put on somebody's wall in the metaverse, it's all happening digitally, so you know what's on somebody's wall. And so automatically a token gets deducted from their account from when it goes on the wall and gets automatically distributed to the rights ownership, including whatever the deal was with the original creator and so on and so forth. So you're going to have so we've already passed the point where you can copy things. You can make perfect digital copies of movies, of audio, and the like. And so that's not the metaverse is not going to change the fact that you can copy the visual piece of an NFT is no different from the fact that you can copy a movie. So therefore, you can say, well, why should I buy a movie if I can, just go steal it? Well, you don't steal it, right? Lots of honest people, but you don't steal a movie and you don't steal an NFT, right? So you have the ownership, the pleasure of owning it, and the ability to control it, and ultimately the economic in the marketplace, the economic ability of rights holders to benefit from what they create and to share that and to plug that into this overall economy where actual creation and utility and payment of the creative work all happens in the same digital environment, and thus automatically plays into a world in which we are living virtually, experiencing things virtually, and transacting things with DeFi virtually.
I have a question for you. So based on your quote that anything that can become technologized will be, and everything can become technologized, what advice would you give to me specifically? I'm 31 years old. I have a PhD in sociology. I'm a published journalist, fiction writer. I also write fintech content for corporations. My whole gig is that I'm a writer in various different ways and a researcher. What should I do to put myself in the best position to be able to contribute usefully and pay my rent for the next 40 years?
So that's a really interesting question, which is getting more interesting literally day by day, where you have, ChatGPT, which is a sort of dumbed down example of artificial intelligence applied to in a very user-friendly way, has set the cat among the chickens, as it were, to an extraordinary degree. Every Ivy League university in the U.S. has run ChatGPT across its final exams, and it turns out that ChatGPT can graduate from college, can graduate from an Ivy League college with about a C+ degree, C+ score. Okay. As SEO mavens are finding out, hello, you can create anything, just write me a 500-word, article for publication about, fintech or whatever it is, so you're out of business. Okay, that doesn't really help. Now, so far today, the kind of stuff that ChatGPT writes is not that wonderful. You can actually, pretty clearly figure out what is human and what is not human. But it's getting better, and it's getting better exponentially. So literally within a year, you won't be able to tell. Within 2 years, it could write better than you. I happen to my late mother, who died last year at 90, was the smartest person literally of her generation. I mean, renowned as a genius. I mean, Bryn Mawr in Oxford, and she was chairman of Partisan Review magazine, probably 180 IQ, and it was an IQ devoted not to math and science, but to the arts and literature. And so, she could compose off the top of her head, sonnets and just unbelievable. And so, I wouldn't have dared do this while she was alive. But now that ChatGPT came out, I just, as a test, said, since I'm working on a venture now in real estate, went to ChatGPT and said, okay, write me a 30 stanza sonnet in iambic pentameter about the New York real estate industry. And son of a gun, back comes a 30 stanza iambic pentameter sonnet about the real estate industry. I mean, like my mother would have had a heart attack on the spot. Right? That kind of thing. If you can do that today, anybody can do that today. The role, the compensatable role of a writer writing for publication and that kind of thing gets to be very scary very, very quickly, right? So what is, and so putting aside your personal specific thing, what does this mean to everybody? And if you think about how companies get, one of the other courses that I did for Singularity U, that I also talk about these days, is, no more companies, no more jobs on the way to a world without work. So if you think about companies got created based on Coase's theorem, and when it became cheaper to do things within a company than to go and do an outside, to hire somebody to hammer a nail, better you hire a carpenter to hammer lots of nails for you instead of going out and doing a transaction for every one nail. So companies got bigger and bigger as you brought things in-house. They got bigger and bigger and bigger until everything was in one big umbrella, giant conglomerate. And then, as technology began to hit post-war, in the second half of the 20th century, all of a sudden it became cheaper to do external things. The gig economy is now the current embodiment of that, where somebody can hire a full tech writer on staff, or they can hire you on a gig basis to go do an article. Right? And so you're seeing companies shrink. And the question of what's going to happen to the future of jobs is really interesting, because jobs started, what were the first jobs? The first jobs were resource extraction, right? Farming, hunting for animals, and ultimately mining or, whatever. And then you had manufacturing from the raw materials. And then you had transportation to take it somewhere. And then you had retail stores to sell in a marketplace economy to sell that. And so if you take a look at the, businesses that are being obviated by technology, and the occupations, well, the first thing are all those resource extractions in the same order they got started, right? So coal mining is not coming back to Pennsylvania, no matter what anybody thinks. It's just, and it's not politics or anything else. It's just you're not getting coal miners back. Period. If you take a look at when I was a kid in school, the plight of migrant farmers and in the Southwest was they would come and pick grapes or whatever it is, and it was a big humanitarian thing. There aren't any human grape pickers anywhere back now in the South. If you've seen the photographs of one of these giant combines that come in and go over an entire field of corn, it plucks the corn, it harvests the corn, it separates the corn, it strips it, it flips it up, it binds it, it puts it in a box, it ties it up, and then there's like a FedEx truck pulling them behind. It pops it into the truck and it's already addressed and going, right? I mean, so that's where we're heading. Hydroponic farms are growing things in giant factories. And so the resource extraction jobs are going. The manufacturing jobs, you take a look at a factory today, a robotic factory, and it doesn't have to be Foxconn in China, it can be anywhere in the U.S. I mean, all of those factory jobs, all those automation jobs, assembly line jobs are going. If they're not gone already, they will be going very, very soon. Okay, how about the transportation, taking it on a train or a truck from here to there? Well, hello, trains over the last century, the crew for trains has shrunk by a factor of 4 because it's now totally automated. It will eventually shrink to a factor of 0. You've seen trains at airports, don't have anybody in them. They're totally automated trains going around. You look at autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars. 10 years ago, at Singularity U, you were talking about, oh, yes, someday there'll be self-driving cars. Well, hello, that someday is now. Every Tesla is self-drivable, and everybody else is working on doing stuff out there. So within again, the essence of the Singularity focus is that it's coming. And it's growing exponentially, and exponential stuff happens really, really fast when it happens, but really slow to get there. That's the whole curve thing going up. So therefore, if the singularity is over here, 2045, the year before, in 2044, you're only halfway to the singularity.
Yeah.
The year before that, you're only a quarter of the way to the singularity, right? And so then, as it gets bigger, it goes whoop, whoop. So today, the fact that you see, Teslas can self-drive and park in the middle of the crazy urban environment and so on and so forth. When are we going to have completely everything be totally automated, electric self-driving, non-polluting, doing that? Is it 5 years? That's probably too fast. Is it 25 years? Without question. Is somewhere in that kind of time frame, 5, 10 years, 15 years. It doesn't really matter, as Ray Kurzweil said. So let's say he's off, on his projections in 2045 for the singularity. Let's say he's off by an order of magnitude. Okay, 2048, right?
Yeah.
He's off by a factor of 1,000. Okay, it's 2055, right? I mean, so it will happen, and so therefore, with this stuff happening, yes, you can assume that these jobs, resource extraction and transportation and manufacturing are going, right? Retail, and Amazon Go, there's no more retail stores. The marketplace, Amazon is online, no people, they all run by robots. Last mile delivery by drones dropping into, your backyard. So there are no jobs there. Oh, and then all those large companies which have second vice presidents of administration and the assistant there and the secretary, those jobs are all going. You don't have those kinds of jobs. Okay, well, what's left? Well, how about those computers, those computer programmers? Oh, AI programming computers over there. People writing fintech blogs. Problematic. So here's what I see as the taxonomy of the future in terms of employment. I think you knock everything out of the window that you already have. The world as we know it, everything you think you know is wrong, and I think the world gets rebuilt like this. And again, I'm talking pre-singularity. Post-singularity, where everything is in the cloud, nobody is employed. It's like Wall-E, right? We're all sitting there on drinking sodas or something, if we're still alive, or we're in giant brain farms like the Matrix, right? So I'm not speaking past singularity. I'm speaking within the next 20 years. What do we have? And at some point in here, in the not-too-distant future, you get to a point where you have. So let's start with entrepreneurs, right? Entrepreneurs, and I am one of these, are like cockroaches. I mean, you can't kill us. We will, entrepreneurs thrive despite the environment. They actually survive and thrive in a changing environment, because what they do is they look and say, okay, how was the ground changed because of this earthquake? Well, okay, what's the need? And I'll figure out how to solve this need. And so in terms of natural entrepreneurs, I have decided, having been teaching entrepreneurship now for 30 or 40 years, that some people are just naturally born entrepreneurs. Most entrepreneurs are what I call self-made entrepreneurs, and they're people who are entrepreneurial as an adjective and know about a domain and see a problem and rationally try and solve it. But there are these people who are these natural-born entrepreneurs. I'm one of them. My father's one of them. I was a finalist for the E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year award back in dot-com boom. My father won it in 2002. He's now 93 years old and going strong. And my friend Norman Lear is 100 years old and going strong, doing new things. So there are people who are, these natural entrepreneurs. They account for about 1% of the population, and they work about no matter what happens. Wherever, whenever, as long as there are sentient human beings, they'll figure out how to make something happen, right? But as they build companies, not giant mega companies, because there won't be giant mega companies. It'll all be smart contracts on the blockchain or something else. But there will be companies. And the people who they will bring to work with them in their companies are STEM types and creative, advanced level STEM types and advanced level creative types, right? So then the question is, what percentage of the population have enough STEM or creative skills to be really viable in a world of ChatGPT and self-coding applications and so on and so forth? Not a lot. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, call it 9%. Okay, 9%. Then what's next? Well, people who aren't necessarily those sort of STEM and creative types, but are on the entrepreneurial end of the spectrum and can produce value themselves. A hairstylist, an Uber driver, as long as you have Ubers, or a babysitter or something, right? So somebody who was a personal producer, but who was able to use technological platforms and everything that goes along with that to create their own career. Reid Hoffman wrote a book called The Startup of You. Right, so you effectively are responsible for filing your taxes, getting your business, ensuring that your Yelp rank is high, that people can find you on Google, that your hours are updated, that you can deliver and integrate with their wallets, whatever. Right, all the business stuff, taking advantage of platforms in support of you creating personally produced value. And so I call those entrepreneurial personal producers. And what percentage of the world can both create things of economic value and also manage their own life in the process of doing it independently of anybody else, right? 5%? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%? I think we're getting really, really, generous here. But okay, let's say 10%. All right? Okay? So now, let's recap the bidding. We got 1% entrepreneurs, 9% STEM and creative, high-level STEM and creative types, 10% entrepreneurial personal producers. That's 20%. Okay, what's next? There is no next. There is no next, which means that in some relatively short period of time, I believe that something like 80% of the population will be economically unemployable. I mean, they can do things, they can make things, but there's no business. They won't be able to make enough of whatever, services, goods, for people to pay for them, to pay for their existence on the planet. So what does that mean? That's a problem. Okay, well, that means you got two choices. Either the 20% can let the 80% starve, but A, you shouldn't do that, and B, if you try to do that, you'd have a revolution, so you couldn't do that. And so, therefore, as Sherlock Holmes wrote, once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, is the answer. And once you say, okay, we're not going to let the other 80% of the population starve, but they're still there, and they're economically unavoidable, and this additional, all of this value is being created by a shrinking part of the top, augmented by a whole heck of a lot of technology. Ultimately, the only option is to take the sort of total gross domestic product that is being produced by whoever's producing it and spread it out across everybody to pay for everybody. So whether that's done with public works or public housing or the cost of things go to free or universal basic income, or there are all kinds of ways of doing it, but that is where things ultimately go. And then that finally leads into the question of, okay, now that we've divorced work and the concept of sort of pure concept of work, it has to hurt. What is work? I mean, I work as an entrepreneur. I love doing it. For me, it's play, right? But it's work on some level. And so when people no longer have to work because they can't work, they can't create value for what they're doing. Now you get to things that, whether you call it leisure time or they're creating art or music or whatever, and how they spend that time with equally augmented systems in the metaverse or whatever is, online with creative tools in there, whether they enjoy collecting matchbook covers or whatever you do, you have to do something, and you have to have a goal. You have to be able to execute it. Aristotle's definition of happiness was the exercise of one's vital powers along lines of excellence in a life affording its scope. And when you get to a world in which you have effectively the scope of anything out there, then you've got to figure out what your personal vital powers are. Is it music composition? Is it music, performance? Is it reading? Is it playing chess? Is it whatever, playing video games? Whatever it is that you're really good at and you enjoy doing, ultimately, how to use that leisure time in the creation of arts and things that help, other people and help society is going to be one of the really great and interesting challenges as we head up to the singularity.
We've spoken a lot about the lead up to the singularity and some speculating about immediately beforehand and who knows what afterwards. I would love to hear your thoughts on what you are curious about in the next 1 to 3 years in terms of how Web3, AI and blockchain will interact with business, with writing, with creativity.
It'll be, so there are the most immediate thing. The most immediate question right now, which is being discussed all over the place, is the question of generative AI and ChatGPT, as the example of that everybody can get their hands on right now, right? So you can go ask ChatGPT, what is David S. Rose's writing style like? And it will give you back a whole paragraph about my writing style. And then you can say, okay, write a discussion of the forthcoming singularity in the style of David S. Rose. And we can just avoid this whole podcast because it could just go do it for you automatically. You're rapidly getting to the point in terms of deepfakes and generative AI, not only photographic and audio and everything else over there. So, we are not at all far from, I could train myself into the metaverse right now. And I actually happen to be a really good example of this because there's a website called Quora, which is a question and answer website. It's only prompt and response. But, I've been writing on Quora for, probably 12, 13 years now. I've written over 12,000 answers, all of which are carefully in my own voice. I personally wrote. They are based on my knowledge and my experience and understanding, long-form, well-done things, not only on startups and the singularity, but on everything from, child raising to ethics and so on and so forth. And so you have a hell of a training set there for something 12,000 perfectly formatted, token prompts and responses. Lots of video of me. I wrote 2 New York Times best-selling books, which I recorded in the studio. So you've got, probably 20 hours of my, voice, and not only podcasts like this. You have generative AI that can take my face and create things over here. So we are not far off from, letting you interview David S. Rose for your podcast and have him opine intelligently on all the things he would opine about, what he thinks about it with his, visage and his audio. But he was actually going having lunch somewhere while this was happening, right? And so if that's not here today, and it's not quite here today, by the end of this year, 6 months, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, absolutely, positively. You just take a look at Avatar: Way of Water, right? And you look at this and you say, okay, that's here, right? So so in the very near term, what that generates. And so now Quora, for example, and it's another interesting topic. So Quora yesterday announced that they are now having AI based on ChatGPT, GPT 3.5, answer questions. People went to Quora, which was a question and answer website, to ask whatever questions they had, and then people like me can answer questions. Anybody can answer, anybody can ask, anybody can answer. Well, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, they started using AI to ask questions, to prompt users to write. So it's called QPG, or a prompt generator. And so it was asking based on questions that should be, that the AI thinks should be asked. Well, now, as of yesterday, they now have something called Dragonfly, which is their automated bot to answer questions. And Quora prompt generators asking questions, Dragonfly is answering questions. We can all just go home, because they're doing all the work here, right? But now, so what happens if you were to say, okay, I'm trying to write an article about the future of the DeFi, and I'd love to incorporate, David S. Rose's thoughts about the future of the Singularity. Well, okay, the fact that ChatGPT was trained on 2 large databases of books, one of which must have included my 2 New York Times bestsellers, because it can summarize it, play it back to you, and analyze my writing style. So by definition, the books were in there. So it knows my writing style. It knows my work, which I wasn't compensated for the books being scanned. It was done through things that I wasn't paid for. You're now using AI on the way that has been trained effectively by me to recreate what I would have done. And this is, of course, true for artists. Draw me a picture in the style of Rembrandt, whatever it is, or draw me a picture in the style of somebody who's still alive and is my next door neighbor who's an artist, but I want their style for what I'm doing over here, and that gets rid of their economic incentives, right? Very tough question. There are no easy answers to these things, and right now everybody is, who gets compensated for training? Do you have to pay for the results of training? How can you possibly pay for somebody for the results of a computer-aided something based on of which my training was one teeny infinitesimally small part of it, but in total as everybody else is out there? So I believe that so the usual answer to what I'm saying, when I go through a riff like this, is people say, okay, well, there is still creative stuff. It sounds like a computer. It doesn't sound creative. Okay, fine. It's not my mother, who's the world's amazing writer, right? But it's getting there. 2 years, 3 years, 5. Again, it doesn't matter whether it's 2 months or 2 years or 20 years. It's in that time frame. It's absolutely going to happen, right? So the quality will be there for that. Okay, the art, the ability to create art, to create a new Rembrandt or whatever will be there. You can say human exceptionalism as much as you want, but when you're packaging all that into a computer, you'll get there. The other thing people typically say the computers can't do and technology can't do will be the human touch, human interaction, whether it's sex workers or adult senior care or baby nurses or whatever. Mm-hmm. And there is some truth to that, right? So there will be a lot of people directed into formerly pink-collar jobs or stuff, or things that require people. But there are challenges with that, right? So first of all, everybody who is a truck driver who just lost his job is not necessarily going to be the best baby nurse over here. Skill sets are different and the like. And second of all, in Japan, they already have comfort robots, which they are giving to terminal patients and stuff that are soft and warm and cuddly and mew and coo and stroke you and so on and so forth. Again, that's today. How far do you have to go? And the whole Singularity focus is this technology is happening, and it's happening insanely fast. And if it can be done, it will, right? So yes, for the near term, the next 5 years, 10 years, maybe there is a role for human caregivers that you can't replace with a computer. But if somebody were to tell me that, in 10 years from now, you'll never be able to replace a person, bullshit. It's gonna happen, right? And so the question, I think in the near term, you're going to see a lot of these platforms making it possible for people anywhere in the world, not just the developed, countries. I mean, the U.S. accounts for 20% of the world's population and some majority of a lot of the generous stuff that's coming out. But if you open up the whole world and access to technology and tools and distribution and translation and other kinds of things, you'll open up to a whole set of the population access they haven't had before, and that's good, right? So you'll see, I think, a globalization of the economy, a globalization of creativity. I think you will see many ways now for people to create something. Those who get the hang of it, art that you can hang in my metaverse, homestead over here, and other people can do it, and it changes according to my mood or whatever it is over there. But again, how many people are going to be creating those things? Not billions, right? Some subset of artists, right? So I think that in the near term, you're going to see, in the very near term, next 2-3 years, you're going to see people have the ability to create new kinds of art, new kinds of literature, new kinds of creative works, distribute them, and get compensated for them into new markets and new structures. And that's good. You're also parallel to that going to see the emergence of generative, literature, generative art, which is going to completely obviate the need for much of that out there, which is going to cause some very real dislocation in society. So I've been saying, the robots are coming for a decade and sort of fell on deaf ears. But now that the robots are sort of here, people like you and me and all of our listeners have to deal with the fact that this stuff is coming, and it's going to completely reset the global economy and the global sense of what is art, what is creativity, what is originality, what is human, and what is not.
I'd like to ask you one final question before we finish. Imagine that you have all of your resources taken away from you, except everything that you've learned over your long and illustrious career. What would you spend your time and energy on?
Oh, I am at heart an entrepreneur. And so therefore, I'm one of that 1%. So I walk down the street wearing my sort of doubly augmented reality goggles, on one hand, saying, I wonder how does that street lamp work? Why is there a street lamp here instead of over there? Who's picking up the garbage? So literally, you walk down the street, every single thing is a question, total curiosity as to how things work. But at the same time, I got the second set of goggles, which is this, okay, in the future, how is this going to work? Are you going to have, Disney World underground tunnels for your garbage? Are you going to have automated things in containers that come around at night? Are you going to have and so I am sort of always thinking about, how do things work and how could things work and what will happen when the robots and computers come in and do it? So, if there ends up being a vehicle for taking this sort of entrepreneurial thoughts and ideas and how to make value out of it, then that's what I'll do. If we get to the point where computers are doing everything, then I guess I just sit back on my couch and drinking my giant soda and think about all these amazing things that I would think about as to how they might work. So.
Fantastic. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, David. I really appreciate you making the time for this conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Speak to you next time.